Iraq has been plagued with escalating levels of violence, corruption allegations and general unrest. Will these elections offer a beacon of hope for the Iraqis, or are things likely to get worse? To answer those questions and many more, I'm joined by Sarhang Hamasaeed, a Senior Program Officer for the Middle East and North Africa Program at the U.S. Institute of Peace, and Ahmed Ali, an Iraq Research Analyst at the Institute for the Study of War here in Washington. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for joining us. We are getting some reports in of the number of people who have turned out for this election, according to the Associated Press, and they are quoting the Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, and he says that figure is 60%. Sarhang, are you surprised at that level of voters?
No, I'm not surprised. I think the polling numbers that have been out for a while now, they have indicated that there is excitement on the part of the Iraqi people to come out and vote, and there's a lot of hope for change. So probably 6-7 months ago, people expected a lower turnout, but a lot of effort has gone into encouraging the voters using this as an opportunity to hopefully break some of the gridlocks of Iraq and find solutions that may address the security as well.
All right. Ahmed, the other thing that the Prime Minister said, according to this AP report, is that this high turnout is, quote, a slap in the face to terrorism. He said the election defeated al-qaeda and the Islamic State in Iraq. That's another group in Iraq which is staging violence against the government. It's known as ISIL. Has it?
The turnout certainly is an encouraging indication about the direction of the Iraqis, what the Iraqis have embraced. And it is, I wouldn't necessarily call it a slap, but certainly a strike against al-qaeda linked groups that have been working very hard and vigorously to undermine the political process and to disrupt the elections. At the same time, this positive outcome should be viewed as a first step, and other steps have to follow in order for the political process to continue to be an avenue for addressing the grievances that multiple groups in Iraq have towards the political process or towards the Baghdad government.
So when we look at the level of violence over the last few years, just last year there was something like 8,000 people killed in Iraq. In the first 3 months of this year, 1,000 people were killed. Those according to figures that were reported by the BBC, the New York Times, the Financial Times. And as I said, according to the BBC, in the first 3 months of this year, 1,000 people were killed in sectarian violence. Would it be fair to say right now that Iraq under Nouri al-Maliki is a disaster?
I mean, Iraq is definitely going through very difficult times, and these numbers that you quoted are very unfortunate. I think it's important to look at what drives these numbers. I mean, Syria and the conflict in Syria and the resurgence of al-qaeda affiliated group like the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, or Levant as some people call it, has contributed to a great degree to that. But I think it's also important to recognize that there are politically motivated violence in Iraq, and not all Iraqis agree on that, especially the government. Although I hope that looking at the general picture now, there will be more recognition that the elections will bring an opportunity to the kind of political process that Ahmed talked about, to make it more inclusive and address the grievances of the people.
Ahmed, do you agree that most of the violence should be blamed on outside groups as well as terrorist groups operating in Iraq, and not much on the government itself? Because there have also been reports that Nouri al-Maliki, through some of his policies, have alienated the minority Sunni population in Iraq.
Various militant groups have been very resurgent over the last 1 or 2 years in Iraq, including the al-qaeda linked groups, and they have been energized by their involvement in Syria. Prime Minister Maliki inherited in 2010 a stable Iraq that was not as violent as it is right now. Some of the policies that he pursued, including consolidating power, have resulted in creating an atmosphere for these groups, for these militant groups, to get stronger and to be much more involved in security affairs. And he does carry some of the responsibility of the increase in violence in Iraq at the moment, because he is the Prime Minister and he is the Commander-in-Chief, and as a result, he was involved in directing the security forces to counter the militant threat from these groups.
I'd like to make a comment about that. I think it's important to look at, and I think that's a right framework to look at the past 2 years. 2 years ago, and when I said politically motivated violence, it was exactly that, where some of the Iraqi communities, when they looked at their options for change, they looked at civic disobedience, and they went to the street, and they protested in different parts of Baghdad, Salahuddin, Anbar, Kirkuk, and Nineveh. And they did not feel that these protests brought the kind of change that they were hoping. So this is where the alternative is dangerous, where people, if you do not find solutions to your grievances through civic engagement and through civic avenues that the institutions of Iraq face, then some people have sought the alternative. Now it is very important that, yes, the Iraqi people have voted for the elections, and that was an important milestone in Iraq's democracy. But it's also important to realize, and there is a responsibility on the Iraqi leaders, that what is at stake now is that civic engagement, that belief that civic institutions will bring the kind of change to address the grievances that the people in Salahuddin, in Anbar, in parts of Baghdad, in Kirkuk, and in Nineveh believe in. And also important that for the relationship between Baghdad and the Kurdistan region, that the institutions of the Iraq can resolve these differences, and standoffs like that happened between the Iraqi command operations of the Tigris and the Peshmerga do not repeat as it happened in 2012.
Ahmed, do you share that optimism that civic organizations, civic engagement could be a viable alternative to the violence that we're seeing?
They certainly could, and the early indications about the turnout in predominantly Iraqi Sunni provinces like Nineveh and Anbar point to the embrace of the political process by the citizens of those provinces. I would caution against making early conclusions about that, however, because the process is going to be long. The government formation period is going to be protracted, and that government formation period has to take into account past grievances by the different Iraqi communities, not only the Iraqi Sunni community, and also the actions of militant groups that will try to convince the population that violence is the means to achieve stability, and or is the means to achieve their objectives, not politics. Therefore, there is a long way to go for these elections to set the conditions for stability in Iraq.
Okay. Sarhang, we have an intelligence assessment which was in the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal was quoting American intelligence sources which say that Mr. Maliki's re-election could increase sectarian tensions and even raise the odds of a civil war. The newspaper also cites Maliki's accumulation of power and his failure to compromise with other Iraqi factions. And that's according to the Wall Street Journal, which is quoting American intelligence sources. What do you make of that?
I think for quite some time, the opponents of the Prime Minister and also analysts outside Iraq have focused too much attention on the role the Prime Minister is playing and the consolidation of power that they accuse him of doing as a key driver of the division in Iraq. I think this is where, looking at the security problem and treating it with only force and approaching it from a security standpoint, this will be a problem. And whether he is re-elected or a new prime minister comes, I think focusing on the people is not the key thing to do here. It is what are the policies, and alienation of the population and the population not feeling that they are included is a problem that needs to be addressed. So the government should take practical steps to lay out a strategy that is communicated to the people, where they see what are the avenues and the grievances that that will be addressed. Focusing on and looking at the protracted government formation of 2010, the different communities and different components of Iraq focus on how many ministries do I get as a way to ensure that their interests are protected and they are participating in the direction of Iraq. But we didn't see that happening actually after the government formation, where even though they had representation in parliament in the government, that didn't mean their grievances were addressed. So as the government, whether the populations they go for a majoritarian government or a broad-based partnership government, it's important to look at the issues of the people: security, political inclusion, corruption, services, and the people need to see these addressed regardless of, and this is where they could address some of the fears that the Sunni representation may go down this time because of not many voters in the Sunni areas could vote.
Right. Ahmed, according to an Associated Press report, it's unlikely that Nouri al-Maliki's party will get a majority vote during these elections. He will have to go and negotiate with smaller parties to form a coalition. The last time it took 10 months for the government to be formed. Is it likely that it could take that long again this time? And to what extent could that contribute to more instability in the government, in the country rather?
It is very likely that the government formation period will be protracted because not any single group will get the plurality to form the government from the first attempt. And that period of time will be a ripe period of time for violence to increase. And it will depend on the negotiations and the tenor of those negotiations, including the behavior by Prime Minister Maliki, who my colleague Sarhang is correct that his term will be about the institutions of the country, but his time in office, Prime Minister Maliki's time in office, did not allow for the development of the political institutions of the country. And these institutions will come under scrutiny during the government formation period, and they will face a great test in ensuring that these elections and the high turnout by the Iraqi people will translate into long-lasting stability as opposed to further deterioration in security and political environment. And Prime Minister Maliki will be a key actor in ensuring that the process has to be free and fair.
Right. Sarhang, do you expect there to be significant Sunni participation in any new government that's formed?
I mean, we'll have to see about the numbers because the way the turnout and security in the mixed areas where there are populations, for example, in Diyala, Baghdad, in Kirkuk, and parts of Nineveh, did not allow for some of the Sunnis to go and vote. So in these mixed populations, where they are Shia and Kurds, they stand to gain from a lower Sunni turnout. So their seats may go down a little bit, but I think overall, the government, whether they have lower turnout representation or not, the government needs to take their grievances into consideration. And getting back to the government formation, I think, and the security situation, I think Iraq does not have the luxury of waiting for 10 months. Unfortunately, it may drag on, but it's important as they go into the Iraqi leaders, international community, as they observe, if the government formation drags on, and there are active military operations, and the geography has expanded significantly over the past few months, and the narrative of fighting al-qaeda and terrorism gets entangled with the government formation and the positions that these parties take, it may jeopardize the potential for forming a government. But the other way around, if they see that as a common threat and they have a common understanding, it could accelerate the government formation. And I hope that they will choose the latter.
Okay, that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thanks for joining us.